Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, Rodeo Time, the podcast. That's what that is. It is Rodeo's finest and guest. Today we have in the house Mr. Kyle Thompson. He has the #1 Christian podcast out there. A mutual friend of ours, Matt Chandler, introduced us. So we're going to chop it up talking about our faith and where we're at in the world today. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel because we've put out a lot of podcasts. We've got 3 or 4 coming after this one that we've already recorded that you're going to love. Don't forget to comment down below and check out rodeotime.com because right now through the end of the year, every cap, t-shirt, hoodie order enters you in a chance to win my 2023 Can-Am Defender. It's a 4-door, so go get entered to win that bad boy. And check out Ranch Fuel, old son. I'm going to have me a little sip of this as we get started. Welcome, Mr. Kyle Thompson, to Rodeo Time, the podcast. You have a podcast yourself called Undaunted.Life.
That's it.
A Christian podcast. And we usually start with questions from the audience.
Okay, good.
Yep. Someone cuts you off in traffic. What takes over, your Christian podcaster self or the Jiu-Jitsu brown belt self?
Yeah, so in that world, there's like a very fast track to anger because of the redheadedness. So that the ginger part of me basically overrides a lot of that. And so it's kind of a short circuit, and then I respond immediately. So the repentance comes pretty quickly thereafter. So it's not really the Jiu-Jitsu brown belt or the Christian. It's just like crazy ginger, frantic anxiety energy. So.
Gotcha. Dogs or cats, and why cats?
Okay, definitely not cats because I'm not a communist or a Satanist, and so it's definitely dogs. And part of the reason why I wasn't able to have very much fun on this trip out here was I got a big portrait tattoo of my dog that just died on my leg, a few days ago. And so you can't submerge in cold water, you can't be in a sauna, you can't fight people at jiu-jitsu, you can't ride a bull. So all the stuff that I planned to do, coming out here a few weeks ago, wasn't able to do. So blame Dustin Yip in Oklahoma City for tattooing my leg like that. No, can't. I mean, the dog didn't. The dog
blame the dog.
Went and died. Hey, man, it's still like
it's still
not
fresh.
Yeah, it's still a fresh wound.
You could blame the dog
in a lot of ways.
You get to the pearly gates. Of course, your first question is, why did you make me a redhead? But what's your second question?
No, that's the first 2 questions. And so then the third question is, do you know how much I had to spend on sunscreen? So the first 3 all have to do with the ginger part of it, because what people don't realize, because they think my wife's, brown haired, beautiful, can tan, all the things that I hate in a woman. And her big thing is she likes redheads. And so for whatever reason, she's attracted to recessive genes. And so she was fingers crossed that our boys would come out with red hair. And neither one of them did. Our second son's a little bit fair skinned. See, that's where I was in this thanking God thing. And she's like, no, I wanted gingers. I was like, all right. And then I saw this online. I was like, this is perfect. If you have ginger kids, you have to think about pools and sunscreen and all that. So it's find a piglet and try to cover that piglet in sunscreen. And how many piglets can you cover in sunscreen before you're like, I'm just over this. You're just going to burn. And so she doesn't really realize that because she has gradations of color, whereas I have 3 color options. It's red, pink, or clear. And so she doesn't really understand that 2 of those are just not really fun at all. And so you're just stuck with this translucent thing. So she doesn't really get it.
You recently put out a video, 48 Reasons to Vote for Kamala. Have you always peed sitting down, or is that new?
It's one of my favorite things to do, actually, and I like to do it in public, where people can actually see. And so so here's the thing. So guys, go.
Remember, these are questions from the audience.
Right. I know.
Not me.
No, you didn't come up with any of these. I'm fully aware. But yeah, I wanted to make sure that I gave each candidate, I don't know when this is coming out, before or after the election.
It'll be
probably after the election. So you guys already, it's probably going to be 4 weeks before we even know who won, quote unquote. But I wanted to give each candidate equal consideration on my show. And so I gave Trump and Kamala the same amount of time. And I think that my Kamala episode is the most thorough episode of reasons to consider voting for Kamala Harris. So make sure you go back. I think that was episode 667 or 668 or something like that.
Probably so it's 666.
Yeah, it's just, That one, actually, I thought about skipping 666 because people can get real sensitive about numbers and things that they don't understand. And so instead, I recorded an episode about how Christian metal music is not satanic. And so, because the bumper music on my podcast has always been metal, like Christian metal music. And I've had people like, why are you using demon notes in your intro? This is a Christian podcast, right? And I'm like, well, yes. And what exactly are demon notes? Those sound awesome. Like there are actual notes and sounds that God can't redeem. That's cool. And so, I've been informed over the years that my taste in music is overtly satanic. And so I addressed that in episode 666. Had some fun with that.
Yeah. Starting to question whether or not I should have brought you on here.
More than likely, it's going to be a mistake. I mean, you don't have to release this. So I can just drive home.
We've done it before.
Have you?
Just kidding. No, not really. We did lose the audio on one, and that one was we've done that before.
Well, Jesus made sure of that.
So
now I will say I'm kind of like if you make me touch any of the tech, it'll automatically not work. Like that's my relationship with technology. Like when I go buy a new phone, I tell the person, hey, the phone that was meant for me, grab the one behind it, right? Yeah. So the one that was meant for me was just for whatever reason that y'all can't figure out was not going to work. So just grab the one behind it so that I can just have one that's going to work at least for a few months.
Yeah. So Undaunted, what does Undaunted.Life mean?
So, if we back up to kind of why I even got into this space, because, the show is faith, culture, politics, not necessarily in that order, not necessarily an even split on those. I became a Christian as a 15-year-old. And I was the only person in my family that went to church because, I call it country music theology. But if you grow up in Oklahoma, if you were born on red clay and, your grandmama went to church and if you got baptized as a kid and if your parents listen to country music and if they occasionally vote Republican, then you get to go to heaven, right?
Oh,
because
it's a pretty good start.
Yeah, it's not bad. It's not bad considering some of the other options, right? So because God's
kind of describing paradise.
Yeah. The thing is, though, is none of those things save you. They make you awesome, but they don't save you. And so I started going to church on my own because that's where all the cute girls were on Wednesday nights. They were at the church, so that's where I needed to be just in case chairs needed to be set up or boxes need to be carried. And then, Jesus snatched me up on a random Sunday night, and so here I am, like I'm 15. I'm trying to figure out, okay, what does it mean to be a Christian? What is that? Like I don't really get it. I don't really understand. And then I'm also figuring out what does it mean to be a man, right? And so I just figured that, if you're a man, you're outside the church doing man stuff, right? Because man stuff doesn't happen inside the church, right?
Well,
and then
hold on. I'm sorry. Before we get too far into this, you guys have to know his podcast about Kamala. I can't leave it. I can't.
I mean, it's the surprise that'll get him.
He says in there, these are the reasons that you should vote for Kamala.
The ultimate list. And
then it cuts off, and it is silence for 44 minutes. So we need to maybe even put that back at the beginning because I don't.
Well, I'm just saying, I wanted
that's a good joke for your listeners, but my listeners need to know.
Hey, I wanted to be thorough. I wanted to make sure I didn't leave anything out.
That I didn't bring on the president of her campaign. Anyway,
hey,
back to young Christian man, 15 years old. You're in Oklahoma. I'm sorry to interrupt. I just had to clear that up.
No, that's good. It's good
there's
to clear
some people out there like, what's going on?
No, there were people that were in my DMs that didn't listen to the episode. They were like, how dare you even record this episode? And I'm like, hey man, just give it a chance. I'm trying to call balls and strikes here. And then they finally got the joke. But I'm trying to figure out what it means to be a man, what it means to be a Christian. And I just kind of came to the conclusion that those just aren't the same thing. Manly men are outside the church doing man stuff. Christian men are inside the church, like limp handshakes, khakis, tucked in shirts, like that kind of thing. And it wasn't until I started reading the Bible for myself where I was like, okay, this Jesus dude was he seemed pretty rough. Like he would say things that would make people so mad they would want to kill him. And it's I've said some incendiary things and never had that happen. And so you kind of come to this conclusion that this Middle Eastern Jewish construction worker was actually a dude, like a real full on dude, manly man, the manliest man that ever existed. And then, I started helping out some men's ministries get going and get started. And, it's just everything kind of moved a little slow. And in the men's ministry space, and I'm sure a lot of your viewers will understand this. They're like women's ministries that are repackaged for men, right? So it's the stuff that you would do at women's ministry. Like, hey, let's just circle up and talk without having done anything or earned anything or accomplished anything and just bare our souls and, lay it all out there. And it's just that's not that's not really how you're supposed to do it. You know, covering your logo in camo or wood or steel or whatever like that doesn't make you a men's ministry. And so the word undaunted just kind of like came to me. I guess you can say God put it there, but it's like, you know, it's being fearless, and Undaunted.com was taken. So Undaunted.Life was available. And so that's why the name is Undaunted.Life.
Gotcha. Undaunted.life.com.
Well, that would be even better. No, it's just Undaunted.Life, and we just say Undaunted Life, or people just say Undaunted. It doesn't really matter.
Yeah.
You can find us pretty easy.
So what have you found has been, I mean, you got 700 episodes.
Yeah.
So tell me about just the course that your podcast took, and just the as the conversation went on, like, because Christian podcast is pretty broad.
Yeah. Right.
So what did you set out to really minister to men?
Yeah, I mean, I could have just planned out my success like you did, just step by step, and then all of a sudden you're like rich and famous and everybody knows you online. But like I did it very differently. When I started recording, like I never assumed people would listen. Like that was the thing. Like none of this was the plan. Like, wait, we have the #1 podcast for Christian men. Like how did that happen? I was like, accidentally. Because I'm just recording in a closet in my room at home, and I just wanted to work as unto the Lord, present content in a unique way with my own philosophy, and just let the market accept or reject it, right? And because I think so differently about a lot of these things, I just assumed that people would reject it. It was just going to be too harsh. It was going to be too forward. It was going to be too abrasive. And, you know, the show just slowly grew and grew and grew, and I swore I would never do interviews. And then on episode 100, my buddy Eddie Penny, retired Navy SEAL that became a Christian. It's got a crazy story. You know, he was my first interview, and then I kind of did some more. And I mean, I just didn't miss a week. That was the thing, is like, you know, every week I'm going to record something, and, you know, it's either going to be about something I'm thinking through or something in the news cycle, or we got into interviews. And, you know, now that we're marching up near 700 episodes, it's like, all right, well, I've talked to a few hundred different.
Why did you never want to do interviews?
Part of it was because I didn't really, well, you mentioned this last night, when you interview someone over the internet, like, when's the last time you've been on a Zoom call that just absolutely like, oh, I was so engaged with that Zoom call. And so I was concerned about being able to have that, you know, camaraderie and that, you know, kind of that energy that you get when you're in the same room with somebody. Mm-hmm. And I guess I just thought, hey, there are people that do interviews, and then there are people that do solo shows, and you can't do both. And so, and now we basically, on a normal week, like Tuesday will be an interview with somebody. Thursday will be a solo episode where I'm covering some big topic, and then I do like these quick hitters where I hit like a bunch of stuff that's been in the news cycle that I want to give quick feedback on. And then Sunday we do something called the Forging Table, where it's me and 3 other laymen. It's a kind of a rotation of guys. And we're just going through books of the Bible, like one chapter at a time. Like it's literally a men's Bible study. I just happen to have mics and cameras and stuff like that. And so like everybody that's on, it's like, hey guys, we're not performing. We're not trying to, you know, show off theological chops or anything like that. Like we're literally just trying to get after it.
So what is something over the 700? When was the first episode?
First episode would have been summer of 2017.
And you're not necessarily a pastor.
No.
So what is it that made you want to, what is it that led you down the path of teaching?
Yeah. So
that you don't want to be a pastor, but you do want to teach on a podcast.
Yeah. I mean, ultimately the podcast wasn't even that serious where I felt like I was going to be a leader or a thought leader in a particular space. It was just like, I got stuff in my brain. And so to keep me from getting into a bunch of Facebook fights, like I can just record a podcast and I'll either be screaming into the ether because nobody will be listening or tuning in, or people will listen and be like, oh yeah. And so over time, I kind of got the same feedback. Hey man, I've had that same thought and I thought I was crazy, but then you said it. And then I kind of got the words for it. And so like, I don't feel as crazy. And so a lot of it's in kind of that, you know, Christian men's space. Cause again, man, the Christian men's ministry space, for a lot of reasons, I just hate it, because a lot of churches are like, oh, we have a men's ministry. It's like, oh, what do you do? Oh, we do a beast feast once a year. We do a chili cook-off once a year or something like that. I was like, well, you're not really equipping men and discipling them and helping them be the heads of their household to where they can catechize their kids. Like, you're not really doing any of that. You know, something happens in your community or a bunch of dudes getting together to fix it. Like, you're not doing that either. It's like, we've confused men's programming for men's ministry. And so I just don't even really talk about, men's ministry anymore. When churches ask me, how can we have a more vibrant men's ministry? I was like, hey man, worry about making your church man friendly. Like, let's start there. Like, does the pastor seem like a guy that other men would want to follow? Like, are the songs being sung in a key that men can hit? Are the lyrics homoerotic where you're talking about Jesus like he's your boyfriend, like he's your cutesy wootsy little buddy that you can just tuck into your front shirt pocket and all that? Or are you talking about like the creator God of the cosmos, right? And so if all the volunteer opportunities in your church are taken by women and mainly for women and children, like that's a man-friendly problem, not a men's ministry problem.
Yeah. What church do you go to?
So I go to Faith Bible in Edmond, Oklahoma. It's a non-denominational Bible church where we just like expository preaching, like Dr. Mark Hitchcock, like we're going verse by verse through books of the Bible. Like you can read Colossians in like 7 or 8 minutes. It took us like 6 months to get through Colossians this year.
I could probably read it faster than 78 minutes.
7 or 8 minutes. Okay. Yeah. So it's not, gotcha. I mean, I'm kind of stupid. So it might take me 78 minutes, but
gotcha.
7 or 8 minutes, but then we're just slowly kind of like at a glacial pace moving across. So it's not like a lot of modern churches where it's like, hey, it's a TED Talk with a few Bible verses sprinkled over the top. Like, here's some life lessons, but I need to keep my tax exempt status. So let's put some Bible verses over the top of it. So, it's just a really healthy church. Like it's not my favorite style of preaching all the time. It's not my favorite music. It's not my favorite any of that, but it's a very, very healthy church. A lot of young families, a lot of kids running around. It's not one of those churches where, 60% of the people have gray hair. And if they all die out, the church also dies out, because that's a kind of a phenomenon that happens in, I guess, modern Christendom in America, at least. So, it's a healthy church, and it's just a great place to grow, learn how to disciple better, and be a better head for your family.
You talked about, it's not just a TED Talk with scriptures, that way they can get their 501c3 checked off.
Yeah.
What are some things that you would use to identify the difference in those two types of churches?
So typically you can kind of feel whether this church is about attendance or about discipleship, right? And that doesn't necessarily mean it's a big church or a small church, because you might be like, oh, that church has a big parking lot. Like, I don't, that they can't be taking discipleship seriously. But a few years ago, a buddy of mine, he's a pastor out of Florida named Joby Martin, so Church of 1122 in the Florida area. He called me, he's like, man, what's your problem with big churches? I was like, what do you mean? He's like, every time you talk about big churches, you just talk about how they're not serious about the gospel and they're not serious about discipleship. They're just serious about filling up rooms. And I was like, oh shoot, you're actually right. I thought I was being precise in my language, because the size of the church doesn't really matter. It's the focus of the church that does. And so there are churches that want to get you all whipped up, right? So they got the emotional music, they got the emotional plea, they got the music playing at the end of the prayer or whatever, and they just want you to get you to raise your hand. They're trying to make it like church camp, right? They want you to raise your hand so that they can count you in the annual report or whatever. But then they're not discipling those people. They're not helping them understand that, hey, this is a sanctification process that's going to be the rest of your life. It's more about the show, right? And so the hints I give to guys that are like, well, I want to find a man-friendly, like, good church. I'm like, okay, go where the word is being exposited, expository preaching, verse by verse. Not, hey, I'm going to come up with 6 ways how to be a better whatever, and then back into scripture. It's like, it's scripture first and exegesis over eisegesis. So exegesis is, this is what the word says, this is the context of what this is saying, and this is what it means. Whereas eisegesis is, you're reading into the text what you want to be there. So you'll read a text and then someone will be like, oh, well, this applies to
what this means for me.
Yeah. And bro, if anyone says that, even in your local Bible study, friggin' choke them out immediately, get them out of here. Because this isn't about, hey, what this means to me. It can be, hey, this is how I'm going to apply that in my daily life. But there's only one meaning. And the reason why we have all these different denominations is because we, quibble about what the words actually mean. But that would be what I tell people is like, hey, are the men around? Do you see men around? Or is it a bunch of women and children without any men? Like, that's a good hint that church isn't very man-friendly either.
Yeah. And it doesn't mean that that doesn't mean that, and I don't think you're saying this, that doesn't mean there's anything wrong with the women in that church.
Of course not. It's just out of order. Because if you look at creation order and you look at the dictates of Scripture, even from the beginning, men and women were equally made in God's image, but they were not given the same tasks. So this is not an equality thing about men being better and women being subservient because they're lesser than. Like that's not the narrative of Scripture. It's you're equally made in the image of God, but you've been given different roles in the kingdom. You've been given different roles in the household, right? But here's the problem is if men abdicate their leadership inside the church, what are the women supposed to do? They're going to fill the vacuum, right?
Yeah.
And so women aren't just going to look around like, where are the men? I guess we're not going to be able to do anything. No, they're just going to act. And so, I mean, this can kind of really go out there, but you go back to the Industrial Revolution, you go back to the World Wars, where were all the strong, virile, testosterone-filled men?
Right.
They were underground working, or they were in some, godforsaken foxhole in Europe somewhere, getting bombed. And, even if they came back, they were shell-shocked, but you couldn't talk about it. And so the only people left in the churches were the guys who wanted to be the ministers, who typically ping a little bit more effeminate, right? Just in their personality. And it's the old, the sickly, the children, and the females, right? And so it makes sense that the sermon content would go way more towards grace and less towards truth, way more towards typically feminine characteristics as opposed to the typically masculine. And the same thing with, the kids coming up. They're just seeing the types of music modeled by women. They're seeing the leadership in the church modeled by women. And so if they're drawn to that, they typically are a little bit more effeminate in their disposition. And the people who are the men, the young boys who are more masculine in their disposition, they're drawn away from the church. And so you just fast forward decade after decade, and then you kind of end up where we're at now.
So what is something, as you started, through 700 podcast, what is something that you personally have learned that you just did not see coming?
It kind of goes back to something I said earlier. I didn't think there would be a thirst for the way that I do things. Okay. So very early on, I drew a line in the sand with episode number 4. That episode was called in the Pews. And I was just kind of like, I didn't want to name it that, but I couldn't think of anything else to name it because it was like, and I set up my entire argument for, hey, the modern world that we live in and the way that we've been structured and how ministry is going, it is kind of bending more towards a more feminine aspect of things. And it's led to what ends up being these that are left in the pews. And boy, oh boy, like that did not rub everyone the right way. And I mean, I've lost money because of that podcast. I've been booked to speak at men's events or at churches. And then the elder board goes and looks through my episodes and they just see the episode. They don't click on it, mind you, right? They don't absorb the content to see, they just don't like the word. And so they're like, oh, God, all right, we can't have someone like this. What if he says that on stage? It's like, well, what if I do? And what if the point is to the betterment of the men here, and that's just something that they needed to hear? So I guess my shock is I always thought that eventually the market would be like, hey, man, just too much, too far. And it's just shocking whenever I feel like maybe I went a little too far on this one. Maybe my commentary was a little bit too much. I do get the feedback from guys that are like, dude, thank you so much for saying it. I just felt like I was on an island by myself. And so, because that's what I felt like, man. I felt like, dude, no one else thinks this way. Like, I'm crazy. Like, I'm kind of a lunatic. Like, there's no way these people could feel the same way that I do about these types of things. And so that's been surprising. And then I guess also, like, it's just a surprise to look back and think, man, there's like 6 million podcasts, I think, that are available on the market. And for ours, like in December, we were in the top 150 of all the shows in the world. Like, we were number 2 in our category. And the only men's ministry podcast or like men-focused Christian podcast that's ever been that high. Like, you can't really like plan for that. And like, we don't pay for views or listens. Like, we don't have anybody manipulating our SEO so we can end up higher in the charts and all that. It's just literally dudes that are like, hey man, this guy shared something that I've always wanted to say but didn't know how. And then they just kind of share it around and then you just get that, organic groundswell. And so you can't really plan for that. So, I mean, that's certainly been surprising.
So what have you personally learned from it, though?
The big thing that I've learned is that there is a space for this type of content. And I didn't know that there would be a space for that. I thought I would record a few dozen episodes and be like, oh, that was kind of a cool thing, and then just kind of move on. Yeah. And so for me, it's been invigorating knowing that there are guys that don't feel like their voice is being heard or understood, by the stuff that's on the market for men's ministry. Because here's the thing, like, men's ministry books, like manhood Christian books, there's only been one that's ever sold, and that was Wild at Heart by John Eldridge, one of the best books ever. Like, John's a good friend and mentor of mine. And the thing is the reason why that's one of the only ones that's sold is because they don't market books to Christian men because they just, Christian men don't read books. And so they don't make books for Christian men really, right? And so they're perpetuating the cycle of men being disengaged from this type of content. But I'm like, hey guys, maybe it's that the content sucks. Maybe your way of approaching men's ministry is the same way you've always approached it. And that's just not really what the marketplace wants. And so I guess my concern always was those rougher dudes, those dudes that come from, maybe a rodeo background, or they're fighters. They got cauliflower ear and crooked noses. That they're in the military. They're going to walk into church and see all these kind of doughy, frumpy men and be like, I don't really want to be. If this is what it means to be a Christian, like I think I'll go do something else. And most churches might as well have a blinking neon sign saying, "This is not for you, men. Like go somewhere else." And you know how it is. Like if a guy doesn't feel appreciated or desired or wanted or necessary, he'll go somewhere. Like he'll go to the shooting range. He'll go shoot baskets. He'll go to jiu-jitsu. He'll go somewhere else because he's going to want to felt needed and wanted somewhere. And if they're not feeling that in the church, they're just going to bounce.
Yeah. What are some impactful episodes that you can remember kind of really making you scratch your head? Guests, that you'd had on. Yeah. It's been a lot of our, of the ladies that have come on the show, because it's funny, our audience is 95% male. And so I'll get these emails from women that are like, I know I'm not supposed to be listening to your show, but I'm like, no, like you can listen. I'm just not making this for you. Like this is for men. Like people want me to make stuff that's more kid friendly. I'm like, well, that's not my audience. Talking to a guy like John Lennox, as smart as he is as an apologist, and just to hear him very calmly and succinctly work his way through different arguments as a Christian apologist. Vodi Baucham, it took me years to get him to come on the show, one of the most powerful presenters of the gospel in the world. Joby comes on once a month. Matt Chandler, who you've had on the show, he came and recorded episodes at our house and did the forging table. And those are just all conversations I never really thought that I would get to have with kind of like these Christian all-star type people. But hey, I hope you're enjoying this episode of the Rodeo Time Podcast. I'd like to thank my sponsors, American Hat. Sock it down, old son. Pull it down where it crumples those ears. Rock and Roll Denim. The Reflex, giving me the movement I need to be the cowboy I am. Can-Am side-by-sides. That's what we use to feed every day. And what are we feeding? Total feeds, old son. So check out those sponsors on your trails. Also, rodeotime.com. Back to Kyle.
Mike Glover. He went through a lot of stuff earlier this year, and the stuff people were reading on Twitter and on these random blogs and on Reddit just wasn't even vaguely accurate as to what was going on the ground with him. And I was able to, work with him and chat with him a lot through some of his darkest moments in his entire life. And when he kind of came out on the other side, he was like, Kyle, I want to talk about it on your show. I want you to be the first interview, like after we do this. And I'm like, bro, you could have called Joe Rogan. You could have called Jocko Willink. You could have called Cam. Like you could have called somebody. He's like, no, you help me in this moment. Like I want to have this conversation with you because I know you're just going to let me work through it. And it's like, that's a really cool thing to have the trust of a guy like that I'm not going to try to just clickbait the way through the conversation, get him to say something that's going to look good on Instagram later or something like that. And so, but man, I look back and there's just hundreds of interviews and you just like, you almost forget, like you've talked to Medal of Honor winners. You've talked to people that have, been #1 New York Times bestsellers. A guy like Phil Robertson, right? Everyone's, he's just the duck guy, until you talk to him and the scripture just like oozes out of him. It's not like he sat there and memorized scripture his whole life so that he can regurgitate it and sound smart on a podcast. It's just in there. And he's like, hey, look at here, man. And he just flips over to a page in his Bible and he's making his point, like going through scripture. And so it's just, for me, I feel very, very blessed, very fortunate to be able to talk to some of these people about, in some way, some of the most important things that have happened to them in their life, or just an idea that sat in their soul for forever to where they had to write a book to get it out. It's just a cool thing.
How long have you been married?
We've been married 15 years. So we both got married when we were 22.
Tell me about your walk as it correlates to your marriage and maybe what you've learned through that.
Yeah, so for someone to marry someone that's kind of wired like me, they kind of have to be like
off.
Yeah, off one and just pretty like, they got to kind of be a thug like in a lot of ways. And so my wife is very much so that, because for the most part, she can deal with my level of crazy. Because I look back on like some of the girls that I dated that I thought I loved, in high school, that type of thing. And it's like, gosh, if I had married those girls, I would have just crushed them into powder, right? Not on purpose, just by being who I am on a normal day-to-day basis. And so being able to watch my wife walk walk alongside me, because again, Eve was taken from the rib, from the side of Adam. She is a helpmate for Adam, not a counterpart, a helpmate. It's very different. Like she's someone to be reckoned with, but it's for the total glory of moving this relationship towards God. Because here's the thing about marriage. Because people ask me all the time, like, what's Satan after? Like, what's he trying to get after people? I'm just like, his number one thing is attacking marriage. And people are like, why marriage? It's because it's the closest thing that God has given us to how we can understand the sacrifice of Jesus on the cross. Because Jesus laid down his life for his bride, which was the church, right? So the closest we can get to as men understanding that sacrifice is how we're supposed to live for our spouses. Because we look at this, dramatic moment of like, oh, one of these days my life might be required of me. Like I'm going to have to give my life so that my wife may live. That's dying once though. But a Christian husband dies constantly for the betterment of his wife, right? That's a constant death, a dying to self, to your desires and your needs and your goals and those types of things. And so for me, just watching my wife and I, how we've tried to traverse those things through dramatic moments and through betrayals and through, just knucklehead stuff here and there. It's just, that's my bride. And in my head, I get one of them unless she dies. Like that's my one bride. And so just seeing how you move through, and then what happens when you add kids to the dynamic. We got a 4-year-old and a 2-year-old now. You see her childhood bubbling up through her parenting style, the same thing with mine. And that, certainly doesn't always, coalesce and go very, very smoothly, but it's just part of the maturation process. And you just look back and you're like, dude, I met you when I was a chimp. I was 19 years old. Like I was like 6 years away from my brain being fully developed, and you fell in love with that. Like, it's just, it's a cool thing to see her. And she's very much so a cheerleader for the stuff that I'm doing. She doesn't understand it. Right? So she doesn't like listen to the podcast. She doesn't really consume my content. It's probably better that way.
Well, that's kind of, women just don't understand us.
To a degree, that level of, it's like trying to explain color to blind people. It's just like, she can only get it to a certain extent, but it's just cool having somebody that's like, hey, yeah, let's go. Like, I don't know why. You say you were put on this planet to equip men to push back darkness. I don't really get it, but let's go. Let's push back some darkness. And so it's like, yeah, she's ride or die with that.
What about as a father? How is your walk? Well, let's go back to your marriage, because you kind of talked about her more than yourself. Like, how has it affected your walk with God? Like 15 years of marriage, what does your walk, how different does it look today than it did prior to that? It's
the sanctification process is serious, because I spent a lot of years, I guess you could call it like delayed sanctification or, arrested sanctification, where I felt like I was just kind of treading water, because I was going to one of those churches where it's just, Bible verses and life lessons, kind of mixed together, and, a nice rock concert and smoke machine and all that kind of stuff. And so you're just kind of checking the Christianese box, but you're not really seeking God. You're not really like trying to lead your wife as the head. You're not really doing any of those things. And so really for me in the last like 4 or 5 years, actually like doing those things that you should actively be doing as a Christian.
In the last 45 years? How old are you?
4 to 5 years.
Oh, gotcha.
So I talk a little fast. I guess I should stop mumbling. But like that's really the thing that you look at during that time period, where you're actually taking that sanctification process seriously, discipling and being discipled, taking that seriously. And so if you're doing that, you just can't help but be a better husband, but you're still broken and busted up and jacked up as a sinner. And so you're trying to like figure out, okay, what edges need to be like smoothed out and what rough edges just need to be a part of who I am, because that's how I was made in order to spread the good news of the gospel. And so when you have a spouse that is vocal, like they will let you know when you kind of stray outside of that. But like with kids, I remember talking to this guy at my church. He was the guy that was kind of in charge of men's ministry, and I was kind of like this was 5 years ago, so the podcast wasn't very big, certainly not as big as it is now. And like, so, hey, you guys need to meet, you get on the same page. And so we go for coffee, and I'm just kind of my normal self, like very forward, very fired up and all that. And at some point this guy goes, hey, do you have any kids? And I'm like, at this point I said, no, I don't have any kids. And he just smiles at me. He just kind of this dismissive eye roll smile. And I was like, he goes, yeah, a lot of that angst and stuff, that'll chill out when you have kids. And I go, or it's going to get a lot more intense because it's going to mean a lot more, right? And he just kind of, hand waved or whatever. And that's exactly what happened. I didn't manifest that. That's just what happened, because now it means something. because I got little boys that are watching me. I am their primary example of manhood, right? For better or for worse. And so all that, hey, equipping men to push back darkness, like I'm raising them up in the milieu of that philosophy, right? You know, forging spiritual, mental, and physical resilience on a daily basis. My boys need to see that, because I love my dad. I feel like my dad was a really good dad, but I never saw my dad develop spiritually, mentally, or physically. Like I never saw him work out. I never saw him read. I never saw him go to church. Never saw him pray. Never saw him like do a favor for a friend. I never saw him like put someone else's need before his. And so it's like, for me, I have to model those things for my boys so that they don't have to learn counter to what I've done. You know what I mean? Because part of it is like, I feel like I can't believe I learned these lessons with the upbringing that I had. And look, I was never hungry. Yeah, I always had the things that I needed, and I had a lot of the things I wanted, and my parents were supportive, and my dad never missed a game or a practice, right? So like, I've got a lot of things to be thankful for, but the core things that are most important and interesting to me now as an adult was not part of my childhood. You know what I mean? Like I was telling you, didn't grow up, you know, hunting or fishing or camping or doing any outside stuff or doing anything, you know, like the stuff that I wanted to do. Fun. Yeah, all that fun stuff that you get to do. But now it's like I'm learning how to do that as an adult. And here you are making rookie mistakes, like hunting mistakes as a 30-something-year-old. And, you know, you're embarrassed and you're hunting with guys that have been hunting their entire life. And, you know, you're kind of the butt of the joke. But it's like, I'm down to be the butt of the joke so that James and Eli don't have to be. So that they can grow up having done these things and having confidence in those areas. And, you know, it's just part of the plan, part of the process.
Yeah, so being the butt of the joke. I've been really just diving into like pride and humility. And one thing Andrew Murray said was talking about like accept with gratitude anything that brings you to or reminds you of your need for humility. So like diving into that chapter, which was written in like the early 1900s, he's basically saying like we need to be thankful for our failures, not because they teach us how to win, but because they put us in a place of humility. And humility is where we can begin to be dependent on God. And so, anyhow, that's all I have. It's a statement, and I'm basically just trying to look at all these things, because I say that, you know, you made me think of it talking about being the butt of the joke, because essentially sometimes I think that life might take us to those places to teach us this lesson that we need to learn, which is humility, not so that we can then win the big prize or climb back to the top of the mountain, but so that we can turn around and depend on God, you know, because the opposite of humility is pride. Anyhow, what in your walk and through all these episodes have you learned or maybe not learned or want to learn or whatever on pride versus humility?
Well, I mean, let's take what you just said and kind of extrapolate that out a little bit. I feel like most men don't seek out hard things very often at all because they don't want to have to deal with that pride check, right? So guys will tend to lean towards the thing that they're naturally good at. So I always talk about spiritual, mental, physical resilience. Well, typically you're a natural probably at one of those. So maybe you're always a gifted athlete. You're always kind of in shape. Maybe you have good genetics. And so you lean towards the physical stuff because it's easier for you. But maybe you haven't read a book since high school. And so you've kind of leaned away from the challenging mental stuff. You've leaned away from some of the spiritual stuff because you just kind of lean on the physical. And then you got guys that are like, naturally, they just read the Bible and the Holy Spirit. It's like giving them like words and nuggets. And it's just like, God, it just seems like they have this deep level of understanding. But they, like, if they need you to sprint from here to the highway, like to save someone's life, like they die. Like that's just not going to happen for them, right? They lean towards what they're good at. For me, the biggest thing is like, I try to put myself in as many difficult situations as possible so that I can be checked and so that I can develop resilience. Because like I don't really care about strength, right? Because strength just wanes over time, no matter what, right? So Father Time's undefeated, like you're never going to be as strong as you once were, all that kind of stuff. But your ability to bounce back spiritually, mentally, and physically, like that's the key. And so that's why I'm like a walking billboard for jiu-jitsu. That's like I was thrilled this morning, like the early in the morning, like out here Texas, you got a group of guys getting in here, getting after it, trying to learn. Because if you got an ego problem, jiu-jitsu is going to take care of that. If you're a little weak, a little inflexible, a little impatient, jiu-jitsu is going to expose that. And if you keep training, it'll have to get rid of that. Because no matter how good you get, like there's always going to be a hammer out there waiting on you, right? Mm-hmm. So you might be in the gym, you might be the big dog, and you go somewhere else and you're the nail the entire time. And so, I just got my brown belt this year. I've been training for, going on 8 years. And it's like, you start getting to a place where you feel pretty good and, you haven't really been put in any bad positions in a little bit. And then you just go to that one class and you just get smoked the entire time. And if you go to a good academy or if you travel at all, that's just going to happen to you. And that's ego check time, right? Like I was showing y'all a position this morning where like if you leave your foot dangling there, the guy can, tap you out. Well, I'm a purple belt and I'm rolling with this kid that's a white belt. I think he had a stripe or two on his white belt. I just got lazy. I took his back and I just crossed my ankles right in front of him. And he immediately threw his leg over and ankle locked me. And I had a decision to make in that moment, right? I can try to like 80cc IBJJF championship my way and grit through this entire thing and probably get my ankle snapped, probably get my knee messed up too, or I could just tap. And so what did I do? I tapped, I laughed, and I go, you freaking got me, dude. Like, I got lazy. And so he gets to, I tapped a purple belt that's bigger than me and all that kind of stuff. He got to be that guy for a little bit, but it didn't bother me one bit because I made a mistake. He made me pay for it. And I didn't, maximize the mistake by not tapping and then getting hurt and not being able to train for a few months. Right. And so that's a process that has really aided the podcast because I try to bring humility to certain subject matters while understanding that no one's going to listen to a show where you don't have an opinion. Like some people are like, you just seem really sure of yourself. I'm like, well, because you wouldn't listen if I was like, I don't really know what to tell you. Kamala Harris, Donald Trump, flip a coin. It doesn't really matter. Like, no, you've got to like give people your full-throated ideas and philosophies on a particular thing.
No, I agree with you there. I think that, yeah, I mean, there's definitely a difference in being humble and then being weak.
Yeah.
And those two are not necessarily synonymous.
Yeah, navel gazing is not like virtuous.
Right. Yeah. I don't know. I don't know that you could study it too much, but if you can, I think I might be there. I feel like all the world's problems are because of pride, and all the answers to those problems are humility. And so I just often wonder what different Christian men think about those two subjects. Well,
what's tied into that? Meekness. Because we have been lulled into sleep in modern modernity where we think, the meek shall inherit the earth. Well, we think that meek means weak. And we don't understand the actual meaning of that because people will hear humble and they will think quiet, subservient. It's like, no. A meek man, and Jordan Peterson has helped a lot of people like figure this out and understand this. That is like a knight that knows how to use a sword, but he leaves it sheathed until he has to take it out, right? And so it's having that ability to, because the way Jordan Peterson puts it is like being non-dangerous is not virtuous. Because there are men that are like, they've accepted that, I'm toxically masculine, and if I learn how to fight or shoot or to push back darkness at my local school board or whatever, that's somehow bad, that's immoral. And they think that that's virtuous. It's like, no, you're pathetic is what you are. You're harmless. There's nothing virtuous about a harmless person that's incapable of violence. It's a person that is fully capable of violence and pushing things back that doesn't do it until it's necessary, right? Mm-hmm. And so that's really part of this conundrum where people are trying to be humble and all those different things, and they only look at the parts of Scripture where Jesus was apparently kissing women on the tips of their noses and saying how cute they looked in their tunics and, cuddling a lamb. And it's like, well, do you remember when they were pushing him out to the edge of town and they were going to push him off a cliff and he split the crowd just by looking at them? Like, what kind of look did he have to have in his face? We see from Scripture that he cleared the temple. Well, there are people that believe, and I tend to believe, that he did that twice. Once at the beginning of his ministry, after he turned water into wine, after his first miracle, and once during Holy Week. He cleared the temple twice. This is premeditated violence, premeditated, righteous, sustained aggression. He goes and makes a whip of cords because we have no evidence that he's concealed carrying, a whip or something like that. He goes and makes a whip of cords, comes back, and people always focus on the animals. He also cleared out the people. Like, he cleared out everybody, the animals and the people, and no one tried to stop him. We see no indication from Scripture that he tried to stop him. And so you want to tell me that you You want to tell me that that's wrong, that that's toxic somehow? Because that doesn't seem very Christ-like, right? That doesn't seem like something you would probably see in a modern church, right? But when people are like, hey, you need to be more like Christ, we have to understand that overturning tables is an option, but it just has to be the appropriate tables at the appropriate time.
Yeah. 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 And unfortunately, when I rely on my anger's got to come later, because very, very, very few times am I correct whenever my anger is, when I use that as my guide.
Yeah.
Where does managing your emotions like that, like anger, fall in your walk? How do you address your emotions?
Dude, it's got to be top of mind at all times, because I'm so default angry. Like I'm default ginger, just like it's just chaos inside my brain. Like when people will hear about internal dialogue, I was like, you don't want to hear this internal dialogue. It is absolutely a horror film up there. And so what I've tried to do over years, and maybe this is bad, is I've tried to shave off the edges of my emotional breadth of, reactions, I guess. So used to, I couldn't watch a St. Louis Cardinals game without living and dying with every pitch, right? And here I am pissed off about the Cardinals losing a game in June, right? And there's like 100 games left in the schedule, and I'm just brooding all over the house, right, when I was in my 20s. And so now if I feel that crazy ginger energy like coming up, if I'm watching a game, I just turn it off. I'll check the score in the morning. Oh, they won. Oh, they lost. And then I just move on. And so my capacity for excitement, right? Oh, the walk-off hit, the dramatic win, all that type of stuff. I don't get to experience that. But I also don't get to experience the other side where nobody wants to talk to me and everybody's scared because I'm sitting there like, hooting and hollering, going crazy about a game that has nothing to do with me.
Right.
And so I want to be able to lean back into that. But like, I remember my wife saying this, when I'm in my mid-20s, she's like, how could someone want to have kids with you? And that seems like super harsh, but I'm brooding and complaining and pouting about a baseball game that happened 7.5 hours drive away from my house that I had no impact on. But that's my team, and I'm disappointed. That kind of thing.
Right.
And she's super duper right about that. And so you know what my boys are never going to see? They're never going to see dad get pissed off and cuss at the screen because some 22-year-old kid didn't catch a pass.
Yeah.
Or because their favorite fighter, zigged when he should have zagged and he got knocked out. They're never going to see dad flip out. Dad will have emotion. And I've already had to teach my kids lessons in humility about, hey, dad kind of flew off the handle. I'm really sorry that I scared you. Do you forgive me? That type of stuff. And so some people are like, no, you can't shave off who you are. You just have to direct it. I was like, maybe you can, but I got a level of crazy that you can't understand. And so I just had to like chop off the edges to make it easier to just work my way through life.
Yeah. So what's next? What's next for your podcast, and like what guests are coming up? What's your vision?
Yeah. I mean, for me, the cool thing about where the podcast is now is I'm not really having to chase people to come on the show. Like I probably get pitched 15 or 20 different people from publishers or publicists or friends for every one person that I have on the show. And I mean, like right now we're recording this in the beginning of November. I've got all my interviews through February, right? Just lined up, kind of ready to go. And so there's not really like Jordan Peterson. That's always the one that's hanging out there because I'm like, I've met him a few times. We've got to hang out a few times, and he's just so unbelievably busy. Like I have to believe that podcast is just going to happen someday, that I'm going to be in the same room with him and get to ask him my questions. But man, I'm just not chasing anybody. If they seem interesting or their pitch is interesting, or I think they would be good for the men in my audience, then I'm going to have them on. But really one thing that I'm moving into that we haven't really discussed publicly, but we hope to do that soon, is I have the guy that reaches out and says, Kai, I've read all the devotionals. I've listened to every podcast. I'm in. Like I'm into equipment to push back darkness. So what do I do now? And, I would kind of meander through an answer to them like, figure out spiritually, mentally, physically, where you have a little bit of a resilience, deficit, and, kind of lean into that, do that whole deal. But now I'm looking to more so drop into people's worlds where I can have a direct impact on how they're leading their families, how they're leading their community, their congregations, like those types of things, to where they're more equipped to be able to push that back darkness. Because here's the thing, like when I go speak at churches, I'm very clear with the leadership. I'm like, guys, I have a style, and my style is burn it down and walk away. You know why? Because I don't freaking live here, right? I'm in Who's It's What's It, Tennessee today, and guess what? I get to go home.
Yeah.
Right? And I've preached before in prisons before where I super duper get to go home. Like they don't get to go anywhere, right? And so I try to leave them with enough incendiary content to where we burn off some of the stupid stuff, the stuff that doesn't matter, and they're left with something that they can build with, right? But I want there to be a little bit more purposeful actions in that where we can really take care of business and really get guys equipped in those areas. And so that's going to require, personalized coaching from me to these different guys. Because part of the thing too is I got a 4-year-old and a 2-year-old, and I'm not going to turn into that Luke Combs songs like all I ever thought you did was leave or whatever, right? I don't want that to be the case where it's like Dad's just gone again, and he says it's for a good reason, but I really wish he was at my practice. And so one of the ways to do that is not to travel more and speak more, but it's to get my content to guys where they're at in a more efficient manner, more direct, more one-on-one manner. And so that's kind of where we're going, but I'm not really big on like long-term goals because I think God looks at your 5 to 10 year plan and goes, that is so cute. Like, you don't know this, but you're about to be sick. Or you don't know this, but you're about to have some big bomb get dropped on your family. Hey, you don't know this, but I got something better for you. And if you listen to me, it'll be incredible, right? And so for a while now, it's just I've been trying to take that next correct step. And it's pretty easy to see that if I've taken the wrong step, God's like, hey, come on, let's get back over there. I'm like, oh man, my bad. So you backtrack and then kind of get back on the right step, but just take that next right step.
Yeah. Cool. Well, what's your plan with jiu-jitsu?
Shoot, keep training and keep tapping when I get in bad spots.
Yeah.
I mean, dude, I spent my first 4 years, Dale, I was probably out a year, my first 4 years, just from neck problems and, blowing my thumb up and breaking my nose and just trying to prove to everyone how tough I am by not tapping, right? And so you're getting friggin' triangled or you're getting like RNC and you're waiting until that, that tunnel is almost closed before you tap because you want to prove how tough you are. And just, all that dumb ego stuff. But with jiu-jitsu, it's just keep learning, keep training. There's nothing better than mat time. I mean, you can buy all the Danaher and, Gordon Ryan DVDs and videos and all that. And all that's great. And you can really level up, but you got to spend time on the mat and you can't be on the mat if you're hurt. And so as a brown belt now, 7-8 years on the mat, obviously black belt is
78 years on the mat.
Yeah, still, man, it's been a long time. I age really well. Yeah. Most guys like you age like milk, and I'm aging like fine wine over here. But like, that's really the thing with something like that. It's you can see the black belt, but I don't see the black belt as the goal. Right when I started, black belt was the goal. I remember tweeting at Jocko when I was like 30. I'm like, how late's too late? To start your jiu-jitsu journey if you want to get your black belt. And his answer was death, right? And you can like hear him saying it in your head. And that's what you really think. But then you just start training and you just one day at a time, like one training session at a time, like one competition at a time. And by the time I get my black belt, if I'm blessed enough to get there, like you realize, oh, there are dudes that have been black belt for twice as long as I've been training. Mm-hmm. So now you're a black belt and it's like, yeah, that means something to the browns and purples and blues and whites, but to a black belt, you're just another black belt now. And I don't ever want to be like one of those lifetime achievement black belts where like you got it, but like you kind of suck. Like I know some black belts that get their black belt and then stop training. I was like, I mean, do whatever's important for you and your household and all that. But for me, this has to be just a way of life, right? I want to be able to model that for my kids. So if I get my black belt in the next, 2, 3, 4 years, like I don't want that to be like, oh, well, I've arrived. I guess I don't have to train anymore. Because you can become a blue belt real quick. Like you've got a black belt in your bag, but you can just really suck. And I just don't want to be that guy. I want to constantly be able to, our guys that are competing all over the world, give them really, really tough rounds that really make them work and think. And so, I mean, that's just the plan with jiu-jitsu. Keep training, like keep being a good training partner and, just do the stuff that makes you good in the long term, which is tapping and keeping that ego in check.
Well, we normally wrap up with life advice. So what's like a one-liner that you have or something that you've gone back to that has helped you through?
Yeah, me, it's just, I was put on this planet to equip men to push back darkness. That's why I'm here. And so for guys out there listening to this, it's like, push back darkness, man. Like that's what you're here to do. So pushing back darkness might be praying with your wife every single night before you go to bed. Pushing back darkness might be dropping into your kids' life and trying to help clear some of the cobwebs and some of the drama out of their life or to let them fail, right? It might be going, to push back darkness on your school board. It might be taking your kids out of public school because of the things that they're going to see and dealing with all the issues of maybe sending them to Christian school or to homeschool or something like that. But when you see opportunities where there is darkness, where you don't hesitate, you immediately go to push it back. And that's going to be different for different guys depending upon, your job and your personality and your persuasion. But a lot of our problems, kind of like what you said earlier, it's a lack of humility, but it's also a lack of courage. And we have so many guys that are just meandering and amoebaing their way through life and just living without any purpose. And if you just wake up every day like, I'm here to push back darkness, well, guess what that's going to do? You're going to train hard. Mm-hmm. Because one day you might need to use your body to stop an image bearer of God from being violated. There was a dude in Philadelphia that was a woman on a train car. And when the police showed up, like a dozen people walked up to the police because they had videoed it on their phones. Hey, just, if you need this for evidence. No one tried to stop them.
Damn.
Well, guess what? In that moment, there's no time for a Bible study. Like, we're not going to hold hands and pray. I'm not going to, excuse me, sir, I don't know if you know this, but this is violative of the creator God of the universe, and what you're doing is actually sinful. There's no time for that. You got to put hands on that person and you stop the threat.
Yeah.
Well, you're not going to be able to do that if you're not trained to do that. Like these dudes, especially big dudes, they think, oh, I'll just see red and, I'll take care of business. And it's like, no, you're going to see red and get your butt kicked. Like that's what's going to happen to you. But you're going to do the things that are required of you. How do you push back darkness? If your family's starving, you know how to procure food, right? So isn't that going to lead to, shooting your bow or shooting your rifle or making sure that you have places where you can go to procure meat for your family? Yeah. Is that going to lean into your business, right? Because it's kind of hard to push back darkness if you don't have the funds to pay for things, right? So there is a financial aspect to this as well. And so, I could go on, but that's ultimately it. If you're not standing ready to push back darkness, you're going to have problems.
Man, well, thanks for coming on. I appreciate your time. I appreciate the message. It was fun this morning rolling with you. Had dinner last night. So you guys check out Kyle Thompson, Undaunted.Life, and he's got upwards of almost 700 episodes. So like, subscribe, comment to this podcast, but also Undaunted.Life. So love you guys. I'm Dale Brisby, and I'm on to the next one. Pow, pow.